Every night her husband drugged her. One day she faked it, didn't swallow the pills. Then, there is a particular kind of darkness that doesn't come from a power outage or a stormy night sky. It comes from the person lying right next to you, breathing softly, smelling of the cologne you once loved, calling you baby with a mouth full of lies. Imani Caldwell Barnes had been asleep for 2 years, not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. Every single night, her husband, the man she had married in a garden ceremony with white roses and string lights, and her grandmother crying happy tears in the front row, had been slipping something into her evening tea, something that pulled her under like a current, something that kept her mouth shut and her eyes closed, and her mind too foggy to ask the questions she should have been asking. She thought she had a sleep disorder. She'd even told her doctor about it. She was almost right. She did have a disorder. It just wasn't hers. But on one Thursday night in late November, Imani did something she'd never done before. The pill touched her tongue. She felt it. And something in her gut, some ancient, ancestral alarm system that Black women have been honing for 400 years, told her, not tonight. She didn't swallow. She held it under her tongue. She waited. She pretended. And then the real story began. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories here that will shake you, hold you, and remind you that the human spirit is stronger than any betrayal. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. We have viewers from Lagos to London, from Atlanta to Auckland, and every single one of you matters to this community. Now, let's go back to Imani. The morning Imani Barnes first noticed something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accompanied by a cinematic violin swell or a thunderclap. It was a Tuesday, gray and ordinary, and she woke up with her mouth tasting like copper and her limbs feeling like they'd been filled with wet concrete. She was 34 years old. She shouldn't have felt 80. She lay there staring at the water stain on the bedroom ceiling, a brown ring that Marcus had promised to fix 11 months ago, and tried to remember the night before. Dinner, the news, ate her evening tea, then nothing. A wall of black, soft and absolute. She'd been waking up this way for months now, and each morning the gap felt wider, the blackout deeper, like something was swallowing more of her every night. Marcus was already gone. He was always already gone. A commercial real estate developer who kept hours that made bankers look leisurely. He left before 6 and returned after 8, and Imani had long since adjusted the architecture of her life around his absence. She was a high school art teacher in the DeKalb County School District outside Atlanta, a job she loved with a ferocity that sometimes surprised even herself. She loved the smell of acrylic paint. She loved the way a teenager's face changed when they realized they could make something beautiful with their own 2 hands. She loved being useful in a way that left marks on the world. She had not felt useful at home in a very long time. Marcus Jerome Barnes was, by all external appearances, a good husband. He was handsome, tall, brown-skinned, with a kind of broad shoulders and easy smile that made women in their church fan themselves slightly when he passed. He was generous, on the surface. The house in Lithonia was a 5-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, and Imani drove a white Lexus SUV that Marcus had surprised her with on her 33rd birthday. He showed up to school events. He remembered anniversaries. He said, "I love you" regularly, with such practiced ease that it sounded almost rehearsed. Almost. "You should see someone," Marcus had said 3 months ago, when Imani mentioned her fatigue. "You've probably got some kind of sleep apnea, babe." He'd said it kindly, rubbing her shoulder while she sat at the kitchen island, struggling to stay awake on a Saturday afternoon. He'd handed her a glass of water and looked at her with what she had then interpreted as concern. She'd seen her GP, Dr. Patterson, who ran some blood panels and found nothing alarming. "Could be stress," Dr. Patterson had said. "Are you eating well? Drinking enough water?" Imani had nodded at all the right moments and gone back home. And that night, like every night, Marcus had made her chamomile tea, a ritual he'd instituted about 2 years ago, saying she needed something to help her wind down. She drunk it gratefully, thankfully, like a woman receiving care from a loving husband. She had been so willing to believe she was loved. The first person to notice that something wasn't right was Destiny. Destiny Okafor was Imani's best friend since Howard University, a forensic accountant with a laugh like a church bell and a mind like a steel trap. She was also, as she described herself, professionally suspicious of everyone. It was what made her excellent at her job. It was what made her an occasionally exhausting best friend. And it was what made her, on a random Wednesday lunch at their favorite soul food spot in Decatur, put down her fork and stare at Imani with narrowed eyes. "You look like you haven't been right since the summer," Destiny said. "I've been tired," Imani said, stirring her sweet tea. "No, I've seen you tired. This is something else." Destiny leaned forward. She was a dark-skinned woman with natural hair that she kept in a perfectly shaped afro, and when she leaned in like that, she had the energy of a woman who had found an accounting error in a billion-dollar spreadsheet and was about to explain why it mattered. "Your eyes, they're not all the way open, even right now in the middle of the afternoon, on your lunch break. When's the last time you felt fully awake?" Imani opened her mouth, closed it. She couldn't answer, because she genuinely couldn't remember. "I don't know," she said finally, and the honesty of it sat between them like something cold. Destiny picked her fork back up slowly. "You seeing anybody? Therapist? Doctor?" "I went to Dr. Patterson. She said it might be stress." Destiny said it the way black women say when they are thinking something they haven't decided whether to say yet. "What?" Imani asked. "Nothing. Just, how's Marcus?" "He's fine. He's good. He's been really attentive lately, actually. Makes me tea every night. Checks on me." "Every night he makes you tea?" "Yeah." "Does he drink the tea?" The question landed wrong. It fell at a strange angle, like a picture frame suddenly crooked on the wall, and Imani's brain tried to straighten it without quite understanding why it had tilted. She thought about it. Marcus made the tea. He brought it to her on the couch, or sometimes right there on the nightstand, if she'd already gotten into bed. He always said, "Here you go, baby. Drink up while it's hot." And she always did. Hey, did he ever drink it himself? I don't think so," Imani said. "He doesn't like chamomile." Destiny didn't say anything else. She just nodded and changed the subject to her nephew's college applications. And Imani let herself be redirected, because the alternative, following that question to where it might lead, felt like standing at the edge of something she wasn't ready to look down into. But something in her chest had shifted. A gear, turning that had been still for too long. She started paying attention. Not in any dramatic spy movie way. She didn't hire a private investigator or install hidden cameras. She was an art teacher, not an action hero. But she started watching. She watched the way Marcus moved in the kitchen when he thought she wasn't looking. She watched the way his eyes tracked her cup. She watched the small, half-second relief that crossed his face when she finished her tea. She began watching her own body too. The timing of the fatigue. It was always after the tea, never before. On 2 weekends when Marcus traveled for work, once to Charlotte, once to Houston, she'd slept normally, waking rested and clear-eyed, so confused by the normalcy of it that she'd stood in the bathroom mirror both mornings, just staring at herself. "This is what I used to feel like." She didn't want to believe it. She is not the first woman, and she will not be the last, to stand at the edge of an unbearable truth and turn away from it because the love she'd built, the life she'd built, the self she'd built inside the story of that marriage, was not something she was ready to burn down. Not yet. But the gear kept turning. Here 3 weeks after that lunch with Destiny, Imani was lying in bed watching Marcus prepare her tea in the kitchen. She could see him through the open bedroom door. The kitchen light was on, warm and yellow, and he stood at the counter with his back to her. He was humming something, low and tuneless. The kettle clicked off. He poured the water. And then, so quickly, so naturally, like a man doing something he'd done 1,000 times, he reached into the pocket of his sweatpants and pinched something small and pale between 2 fingers and stirred it into the cup. The world didn't stop. The humming didn't stop. The tea kept steeping. But Imani stopped. Every cell in her body went absolutely still. She watched him pick up the cup, turn around and walk toward her with that warm smile on his face. And she understood, in the way that you understand when something you suspected but couldn't quite believe finally proves itself, that she had married a man she did not know. "Here you go, babe," he said, setting it on the nightstand. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Drink up while it's hot." She looked at him, really looked at him, searched his face for some crack, some tell, some moment of guilt or discomfort. There was nothing. He was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "Thanks, baby," she said, and her voice didn't shake. She was proud of herself for that later. She would be proud of herself for a lot of things that were coming, but that night she drank the tea because she needed him to believe nothing had changed. And in the morning, she called Destiny. Non-moral checkpoint. The first lesson Imani's story teaches us is about the violence of erosion. This was not a man who raised his hand to his wife. This was a man who removed her capacity to raise her own. Control doesn't always look like fury. Sometimes it looks like chamomile tea. Destiny Okafor answered on the first ring, which told Imani that her best friend had been waiting for this call. Maybe not this specific call, but a call, the kind that comes when a woman finally stops lying to herself. "Tell me everything," Destiny said, and didn't interrupt once. When Imani finished, there was a long silence. Not the silence of shock. Destiny was not easily shocked, but the silence of a precise, careful mind arranging information into its most useful structure. "Okay," Destiny said, "here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to confront him. We're not going to call the police yet. We're not going to do anything that makes him feel caught. Because a man like that, a man who has been doing this for 2 years, calmly with a smile, is not a man who panics well. You understand what I'm saying?" Imani understood. She'd had the same thought somewhere under her terror. Marcus was controlled, frighteningly controlled. She needed to be smarter. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We get evidence. We protect you. And then we end it on your terms, not his." What Destiny didn't say yet, what she would tell Imani 2 days later, when she'd done enough research to confirm her suspicion, was that she believed she knew what Marcus was using. Destiny had a colleague, a toxicologist named Dr. Renee Whitfield, who'd once consulted on a financial fraud case involving pharmaceutical theft. When Destiny described Imani's symptoms, the rapid onset sedation, the total blackout, the absence of hangover, the progressive deepening over time, Dr. Whitfield had barely let her finish. "Sounds like a benzodiazepine," Dr. Whitfield said. "Probably crushed. Probably something like temazepam or triazolam. Short-acting, dissolves easily, tasteless in a hot drink. No smell. Leaves the system relatively quickly, which is why standard blood panels don't catch it unless you're specifically testing for it within a few hours of ingestion." "Is this common?" Destiny had asked. A pause. "More common than people know. Usually in cases of domestic control, elder abuse, sometimes trafficking." Another pause. "Hi, come on, your friend needs to get a sample of that tea." Here is how Imani Barnes, a 34-year-old art teacher from Georgia who had never once in her life thought of herself as brave, became the most meticulous, disciplined, stone-faced actress anyone had ever seen. She thought about her students. She thought about a girl named Jayla in her third period class, 16 years old, who'd come to school in the same jacket for 3 weeks in November because she had no winter coat and wouldn't say so. Imani had bought her a coat anonymously through the school's welfare fund. She thought about the way Jayla looked when she picked up a paintbrush, tentative at first, then bold, then free. She thought about what she would tell Jayla if Jayla came to her and said, "Miss Barnes, Hannah, a man is hurting me and I'm scared." She would say, "Gather yourself, gather your proof, and then burn it down." So that's what she did. The system was Destiny's design, executed by Imani's hands. Night 1 of the new plan, Imani placed a small, clean glass vial, the kind Destiny had sourced from a laboratory supply store, inside the drawer of her nightstand, wrapped in a cloth so it didn't rattle. When Marcus brought the tea and kissed her forehead and said, "Drink up while it's hot," Imani smiled and said she would, and waited for him to go brush his teeth. Then she poured a small measure of the tea into the vial, sealed it, replaced it in the drawer, and returned the cup to her lips. She still drank some of the tea. She had to. Marcus sometimes checked on her before she fell asleep. She felt herself going under again. On the familiar slide, she hated it more now that she knew what it was. Before it had been mysterious, frightening, medical. Now it was personal. It was his hands pulling her under. But she had the sample. Dr. Whitfield's results came back in 4 days. Triazolam, a powerful benzodiazepine, typically prescribed in very low doses for severe insomnia, absolutely not to be administered without consent, and in the concentration present in the sample, nearly 3 times the maximum therapeutic dose. It was, by any medical or legal standard, poisoning. Imani sat in Destiny's car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods in Buckhead while Destiny read her the results, and she did not cry. She had thought she would cry. She had already cried privately, alone in the school bathroom with the water running, in the days since she'd discovered the truth. But sitting there with the medical confirmation in her hands, she felt something that wasn't grief and wasn't rage. It was colder and cleaner than either. It was clarity. He's been doing this for at least 2 years, she said. It wasn't a question. Based on when your sleep issues started. Yes. Why? She said it quietly. Not why does he hate me or why doesn't he love me? Just why. The practical why. The investigative why. Because she already suspected the answer, and she needed it confirmed before she was ready to receive it emotionally. Destiny's face did something careful. The investigator I hired. You already hired someone? I hired him the morning you called me. His name is Craig Ellison, former Atlanta PD. He's been. She paused. Imani, Marcus has been seeing someone. For approximately 18 months. The cold thing in Imani's chest got colder. Who? Her name is Brianna Tate. She's 27. She works at a development company in Midtown. Actually, a company that overlaps with some of Marcus's projects. Craig pulled financials. Marcus has an account you don't know about. He's been. Destiny's voice tightened, and Imani recognized that the tightening was Destiny controlling something volcanic on her behalf. He's been moving money, slowly, carefully. An asset protection attorney reached out to Brianna's address 6 months ago. Imani, he's been building a life to step into, and I think the sedation keeps me out of his business, keeps me too foggy to notice the signs, keeps me manageable. Imani's voice was absolutely level. She could hear herself from a distance, like watching someone else in a movie she'd already seen the ending of. He needed me quiet and compliant and too tired to ask questions while he set up his exit. Yes, Destiny said softly. They sat with that for a moment. A white cloud moved across the gray November sky over the Whole Foods parking lot, and a woman in a puffer jacket loaded groceries into a minivan, and the world continued its ordinary Thursday business around 2 black women sitting with the bones of a betrayal in their hands. He's not going to get to exit, Imani said. Not like that. What happened next required 3 things: an attorney, a performance, and 1 more night of pretending. The attorney's name was Gloria Asante, a 60-year-old Ghanaian-American woman who had been practicing family law in Atlanta for 35 years, and who, came when Destiny called her with the outline of Imani's situation, said simply, "Bring me everything, and tell her not to move a dollar, not to say a word, and not to touch anything in that house until I say so." Gloria Asante was the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged its gravity. She wore her gray locks swept back with a gold clip. She had a handshake that felt like a promise. When Imani sat across from her in the wood-paneled conference room of Asante and Mbeki family law in Peachtree and laid out 2 years of documented exhaustion, a laboratory toxicology report, and Craig Ellison's preliminary investigative findings, Gloria looked at everything with the focused quiet of a woman who has seen the worst of human nature and learned to weaponize it in court. "He drugged you," Gloria said when she'd reviewed the report. "That's criminal. That's aggravated battery in Georgia. Administering a substance to another person without consent. That's potential poisoning charges. On top of that, he's committed financial fraud within the marriage. On top of that, he's been building a fraudulent asset protection scheme." She paused. "He's not just a cheating husband. He's a criminal, and we're going to treat him like one." "I want everything," Imani said. "The house, the accounts. I want him to have nothing to step into. Gloria almost smiled. Then here's what we're going to do. The plan required Imani to go home that night, and every night for 2 more weeks, to drink the tea, mostly, to act unchanged, foggy, grateful, to let Marcus believe that everything was exactly as he had arranged it. This was the hardest part. Not because she was afraid, although she was, a cold, controlled fear that she managed the way you manage a fire, by keeping it contained and useful. It was hard because every time Marcus kissed her forehead and handed her that cup, she had to look at his face and understand that the man behind it had decided, with full deliberation, that she did not deserve to be conscious in her own life. He had looked at her and thought, she is more useful asleep. And she had looked at him and chosen to let him keep thinking it. For now. During those 2 weeks, the machinery of Imani's counteraction moved with the silent precision of a master plan. Craig Ellison documented Marcus's second phone, his meetings with Brianna Tate, his visits to the asset protection attorney. Destiny, using her forensic accounting credentials, I pulled apart the hidden financial structure Marcus had built, the LLC he'd created in Brianna's name, the slow drain strategy he'd been executing across 3 of their joint investment accounts. Gloria Asante petitioned the DeKalb County Superior Court for a protective order, an emergency asset freeze, and coordinated with the DeKalb County DA's office, specifically an assistant DA named Tremaine Ford, who had prosecuted domestic poisoning cases before, and who, when presented with Dr. Whitfield's toxicology report, had said, "Get me a sworn statement, and I'll have an arrest warrant by end of week." Marcus knew none of this, because every night Imani came home, ate dinner with him, watched television with him, and when he brought her the tea, she smiled. "Drink up while it's hot, babe." She always did. The last night she had to perform was a Wednesday. She remembered it clearly afterward. The way the house smelled, vanilla and something woody from the candle Marcus kept in the living room. The sound of rain on the Colonial's roof. The particular quality of the silence between them that had once felt like peace and now felt like a held breath. She lay in bed while he moved around the room. He was in a good mood, and she could tell. He'd been in a good mood for days. She'd overheard a phone call that afternoon, muffled through the office door he'd been careful to close, and she'd caught one sentence in a voice both lower and warmer than the one he used with her. "Almost, baby. Just a little longer." He brought the tea. He kissed her forehead. He said, "Drink up while it's hot." She looked at him one more time with her careful, performance-grade eyes, and she thought about what he'd stolen. Not the money. The money could be recovered. The money was just money. He'd stolen her sleep, her presence in her own life, her ability to dream. He'd reached into her nights and hollowed them out, and he'd done it smiling, and he'd done it for years. She raised the cup. She drank, and tomorrow everything would change. Moral checkpoint. Imani's second lesson is about patience as a weapon. There is a difference between being passive and being strategic. The world teaches women, especially Black women, that their anger should be immediate and visible to be valid. Imani teaches us something older, that the most devastating response to betrayal is not the one that happens first. It's the one that finishes it. The morning of November 19th, Imani Barnes woke at 5:47 a.m., not because she had set an alarm, not because the sun was up. It wasn't, not yet. November in Atlanta wore its darkness longer than people expected. She woke because somewhere in the architecture of her body, something had shifted. Some part of her that had been sleeping longer than the rest of her, some deep fiber of selfhood and agency, came fully, irrevocably online. She lay still for a moment, listening to Marcus breathe beside her. Long, slow breaths, untroubled. The sleep of a man who believed everything was proceeding according to plan. She got up quietly, she showered, she dressed, and she sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee she had made herself. Real coffee, black, no additions. And she opened her phone and sent a single text to Destiny. "Today." 3 dots appeared. "Good, then we're ready. Gloria says 9 a.m. I'll be there." Then after a pause, "You good?" Imani looked around the kitchen, the granite counters, the copper pots on the rack that she'd picked out herself. The frame print on the wall near the window. A reproduction of a Romare Bearden collage that she'd loved for 20 years and had saved up to frame properly and had hung on a Tuesday afternoon in the first autumn of their marriage while Marcus was at work, and she was so happy she'd cried a little, alone, just from the pleasure of making something beautiful in a home that was hers. All of that is still mine, she thought. He doesn't get to take that. She texted back. More than good. At 8:47 a.m., Marcus came downstairs in his work clothes, a charcoal suit, the gray tie she'd given him for his birthday 2 years ago, which was almost funny if you had the right kind of dark sense of humor. He was surprised to see her at the island, alert and dressed, coffee in hand, and something moved across his face that she recognized now, looking back, as the very first hairline crack in his composure. "You're up early," he said, and reached for the coffee maker. "Couldn't sleep," she said pleasantly, a small, nearly invisible tension in his jaw. "You feeling okay?" "Perfect," she said. "Actually, Marcus, I've been feeling better lately. Clearer. I think whatever was going on with my sleep is starting to get better." He turned to look at her. His eyes were assessing. Careful. He was a smart man. She had always known this. And she watched him perform the calculation. Is this normal? Is something wrong? His face settled into warmth before she could watch him decide. "That's great, babe. That's really great." He poured his coffee. "Listen, I've got a long day. Site visit in Midtown and then a dinner meeting. Don't wait up." "I won't," she said. He kissed her cheek on the way out. She let him. The door closed, his car started. She listened to it back out of the driveway and pull away, and then she sat for exactly 30 seconds, finishing her coffee, and then she stood up and went to work. At 9:03 a.m., Gloria Asante, accompanied by Craig Ellison and an attorney from the DA's office, filed the paperwork that simultaneously initiated a criminal complaint against Marcus Jerome Barnes for aggravated battery and domestic poisoning under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23, and executed the emergency asset freeze on every joint financial account, so the LLC in Brianna Tate's name, and the hidden brokerage account Craig had uncovered in Marcus's mother's maiden name. At 9:47 a.m., 2 DeKalb County detectives arrived at the offices of Barnes and Whitmore Commercial Development in Midtown Atlanta and requested a word with Marcus in a conference room. Destiny, who was parked across the street with Craig's contact watching the building entrance, later described what happened next as beautiful. Not in a cruel way, not with triumph exactly. More the way you describe something that has achieved its correct shape after being wrong for a long time. Marcus came out of the building's glass doors, flanked by the 2 detectives at 10:19 a.m. He was not yet in handcuffs. This was a formal interview, not yet an arrest. But his face had lost the quality it always held in the world. That smooth, arranged competence. He looked like what he was, a man who had been absolutely certain he was invisible, discovering that he wasn't. Destiny watched him get into the unmarked car and called Imani. "It started," she said. "I know," Imani said. She was at school by then, standing in front of her third-period class, who were working on a charcoal still life exercise. She'd kept her voice perfectly steady. Her students didn't notice anything. "I'll call you at lunch." She hung up. She turned back to her class. And Jayla, in the third row, held up her charcoal drawing, a bowl of fruit, simple and a little crooked, and said, "Ms. Barnes, is this okay?" Imani looked at it. The lines were uncertain but alive, imperfect and sincere, the kind of drawing that was still deciding what it wanted to be. "It's more than okay," she said. "All right, keep going." The weeks that followed were not simple or clean. Let no one tell you that justice, when it comes, arrives without cost. Marcus was arrested on November 22nd, 3 days after the initial interview, when the DA's office had completed their evidence review and the warrant was signed. He was charged with aggravated battery, criminal administration of a harmful substance, and financial fraud. The arraignment was quiet. He made bail. The Atlanta legal community, in which Marcus had cultivated a very specific reputation, solid, family-oriented, a pillar, began to process the information at the speed of a city that runs on gossip and LinkedIn. Brianna Tate, it emerged, had known less than she believed. She had not known about the drugging. The shock on her face during her interview with investigators was, by all accounts, genuine. She had known he was married. She had known about the financial planning. She had told herself a story, as people who participate in other people's betrayals often do, in which she was the exception and Imani was the problem. None of that was Imani's fight. Imani left it entirely to the courts and moved forward. The divorce proceedings were, in Gloria Asante's capable hands, a systematic dismantling. Because Marcus had committed criminal acts against Imani within the marriage, Georgia's equitable distribution laws bent in Imani's direction, with a force that Marcus's suddenly scrambling attorneys hadn't fully anticipated. The house, Imani's house, the one with the Romare Bearden reproduction in the kitchen, stayed hers. The primary investment account stayed hers. His portion of the hidden assets, once unwound, were subject to civil judgment in Imani's favor. By the time it was finished, 6 months later, Marcus Barnes was living in a short-term rental in Smyrna, with a court date circled on his calendar and a life considerably smaller than the one he'd spent 2 years secretly building toward. He had built it on the body of a sleeping woman. She had woken up. The night the divorce was finalized, Destiny came over with her sister Adeze and Imani's cousin Trina, and a playlist and food from Pascal's, and they sat on Imani's porch, her wraparound porch with the string lights she'd put up herself, and ate and laughed and at some point cried, because you can't go through something like this without grief. And grief is not the same as losing. You can grieve a marriage and still be triumphant. Well, you can mourn the version of yourself that believed and still be proud of the version that woke up. "Can I ask you something?" Trina said at one point. She was the cousin who always asked the question that everyone else was thinking. That night, the last night you were going to drink the tea, you actually drank it. Why didn't you just fake it from the beginning? Imani thought about this. The porch lights swayed a little in the evening breeze. The neighborhood was quiet. "Because I needed him to believe I hadn't changed," she said. "If I'd stopped drinking it, he'd have noticed eventually. He was careful. He paid attention to me, just not in the way I thought." She paused. "But also, I think part of me needed to survive one more night of it, not to be weak, but to remember exactly what it felt like, so I'd never doubt myself. So that later, when the lawyers and the courts and the process made it all complicated and slow, I'd remember that night, that cup, his hands, his forehead kiss, and I'd remember why I couldn't stop." They were quiet for a moment. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at the dark. "You're stronger than I would have been," Adai said. "No," Imani said simply. "I'm just exactly as strong as I needed to be. Everybody is. They just don't always find out." 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Imani repainted her bedroom. This might sound like a small thing. It was not a small thing. The bedroom had been a gray blue that Marcus had chosen, from a palette he'd brought home without asking what she wanted. She'd accepted it because it wasn't a hill to die on. Which is how the small surrenders of a marriage in decline accumulate. None of them seems worth the fight, and then one day you look up and you don't recognize the room you've been sleeping in. She chose a deep, warm terracotta, the color of Georgia clay, the color of something rooted. She painted it herself on a Saturday, with Destiny helping and a playlist running through a Bluetooth speaker. And when they were done, and the furniture was pushed back in, and the Romer Bearden reproduction was rehung on the newly warm wall, Imani stood in the doorway and looked at her room for a long time. It looked like herself. She had forgotten how much that mattered. The criminal trial concluded the following spring. Marcus Barnes was convicted of criminal administration of a harmful substance, aggravated battery, when in 1 count of financial fraud. He was sentenced to 7 years with the possibility of parole after 4. The judge, an older black woman named the Honorable Cassandra Drummond, said something during sentencing that reporters would quote extensively, that would circulate in legal circles, and that Imani would write down on a note card and pin above her classroom door for years. What this defendant did was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of calculation. He decided deliberately and repeatedly that his wife's consciousness was an obstacle to his desires. He subdued her, not with violence the world could see, but with chemistry, the world could not. The invisibility of his method does not mitigate its cruelty. If anything, it intensifies it. This court does not take invisible violence less seriously because it is invisible. Imani was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. She had been there for the verdict, had sat in the second row in a deep green dress, with Destiny on one side and Gloria Asante on the other. And when the word guilty was read, she had not cheered or cried or collapsed. She had simply nodded, the way you nod when something that was always true is finally acknowledged. But she wasn't there for the sentencing because she had somewhere else to be. It was a Thursday, third period art class. Jayla was working on a painting, acrylics now, she'd graduated from charcoal, and she'd gotten something wrong in the proportions and had painted over it, and it had made a muddy, strange color where the correction was, and she'd put her brush down with the frustrated weight of someone about to give up. Imani came and stood beside her. "It's ruined," Jayla said. Imani looked at the painting, at the muddy place where the correction sat, strange and dark and unexpected. "In the 1400s, Imani said, Florentine painters called it pentimento. When you painted over something you changed your mind about, and eventually the old image would bleed through under the new one. Like a ghost of the first try showing through the final thing." She paused. "Art historians love it now. They use infrared cameras to find it on purpose. They think it's the most interesting part of a painting. Not the finished surface, but the evidence that the artist changed their mind, that they kept going." Jayla looked at the muddy place on her canvas. "Or so the mistake becomes the most valuable part?" "The evidence that you didn't stop," Imani said. "Yes." Jayla picked her brush back up. Imani stood there a moment longer, watching her work, and somewhere in the region of her chest, something that had been held very tightly for a very long time simply released. Not explosively, not dramatically. The way a window opens on a warm day after a long winter, quietly and suddenly the air comes in. What did Imani Caldwell Barnes lose? 2 years of her nights, the marriage she had believed in, the version of herself that trusted without evidence, loved without boundaries, accepted exhaustion as the price of peace. What did she gain? Her own name back, first. She dropped the Barnes months before the divorce was final. Then the bedroom painted in clay red, the porch in the evenings, in the coffee she made herself, the students who looked at her every day and didn't know what she'd survived, only that she showed up, clear-eyed, warm, present, awake, fully awake. Here are the moral lessons Imani's story leaves us with, and they are not simple and they should not be. 1. Abuse does not require a raised fist. Control wears 1,000 faces, some of them warm, attentive, and carrying a cup of tea. Learn to see the faces. 2. The people who love you most will sometimes see your danger before you can. When Destiny asked, "Does he drink the tea?" she was doing what love does. She was paying attention. Allow yourself to be seen by safe people. 3. Evidence is not betrayal. Protecting yourself is not paranoia. Imani felt guilty at various points for watching, for collecting, for planning. She had been conditioned to feel guilty for her own self-preservation. She overcame that conditioning. So can you. 4. The pace of justice is not the pace of healing, and that's okay. Imani didn't wait for a verdict to start repainting. She started living again the moment she decided to. The legal outcome mattered, but it was not the measure of her freedom. She was the measure of her freedom. 5. There is no shame in having been deceived by someone who worked very hard to deceive you. The shame belongs to the deceiver. All of it, every gram. And now, wait, before you go, if you've been watching this story, sitting somewhere with your phone or your laptop or your tablet, feeling something you couldn't quite name, something that recognized itself in Imani's exhaustion, or her awakening, or her quiet, a methodical rage, know that you are not alone. Know that the version of you that is sleeping can wake up. Know that the most radical thing you can do is pay attention. And know that someone, somewhere, is asking the question Destiny asked. The small, pivotal, everything-changing question. But does he drink the tea? Listen to that question. Follow it. See where it leads you. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, if it made you angry on Imani's behalf, If it made you think about someone you love, please share it. Leave a comment. Drop your city below. We have a community here made of people who believe that stories matter, that truth told well can save lives, and that nobody should be allowed to drug a woman's nights in peace. Subscribe if you're new. Come back if you're not. And wherever you're watching from, Lagos, London, Atlanta, Houston, Accra, Birmingham, Toronto, Memphis, Johannesburg, Philadelphia, we see you. Stay awake. The most dangerous woman in any room is not the loudest one. It is the one who was underestimated long enough to make a plan. For every woman who kept the pill under her tongue and waited for morning.